You're listening to Let's Talk Cuyahoga, a podcast that explores county initiatives and pulls back the curtain to reveal the work and the people who are driving Cuyahoga County forward. This month we asked the question, how is Cuyahoga County responding to residents who are experiencing homelessness? I'm Dawn Calavini from the Communications Department. This month, the Office of Homeless Services is launching a strategic action plan for homelessness with an ambitious goal to reduce homelessness in Cuyahoga County by 25% by the year 2027. We'll hear from county leaders about the plan, from some community partners who work with residents needing housing assistance. And we begin with the director of Cuyahoga County's Office of Homeless Services, Melissa Sirak. Melissa, welcome.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here with you today, Dawn.
I know this has been a long time coming, the strategic action plan, and you've been living with it for a while, but for a lot of people, this might be the first time that they're hearing about it, and it's a big deal. Can you tell the average Cuyahoga County resident why this is a big deal, why they should care about this?
We are extremely excited about the plan, Dawn. I would say first and foremost, when we think of Cuyahoga County and the homeless continuum providers that we have that provide service to our residents, we are first and foremost needing to note that they are strong partners, that they are effective, and there's a strong partnership that has been there for over 30 years that our office has existed. This plan is extremely important. It is the first ever that is a continuum-wide plan that we can transparently and effectively paint the picture of what we currently do and how we will elevate and enhance that work to hopefully end homelessness and at least reduce it in the interim.
It's something where when you look at the past 10 years, what you've had in place for operations is the Cuyahoga County Continuum of Care. And it's been pretty successful in terms of numbers over the last couple of years.
It absolutely has. We definitely learned throughout the pandemic. As I mentioned, we already have a strong continuum of care.
Yeah.
However, we learned that in a time of crisis that none of us could have predicted, how strong we actually were to serve our community and ensure that every resident was safe that was needing shelter services during that time. One of the largest lessons learned, I would say, during that time was particularly around the traditionally unsheltered population and recognizing that as we deconcentrated shelter and used alternative shelter locations that was more of an independent living space, not surprisingly, you provide individuals with a more customized individual living space, not 400 individuals in one shelter.
Right.
They are more able to focus on their housing plan, to focus on their mental health, to focus on their AOD, and feel safe in that environment to do so. And that lesson learned has led to part of our direction in the strategic plan, which is to really transform our current shelter system and the facility themselves to being dignifying and more humane.
The first goal is to improve engagement and access.
That means we have set a goal that we believe every individual should be well aware of how to access our services in the community, and also be engaged in more holistic services. So as someone comes in seeking shelter, how do we link them up with mental health services? How do we link them up with AOD? And also really looking at, this will probably be a common theme that you'll hear as we'll talk about the plan, but how do we customize the services that we provide in the community oh so well already for those populations? So for the young adults coming in, the seniors that sadly are ending in shelter, LGBTQ community, really looking at diversely providing those services, but maintaining our core services that are within the community.
The second goal is to improve the experience of persons in crisis housing. What is the definition of crisis housing?
So those would be our temporary shelters, emergency shelters that we currently have within the community.
And how long does a person generally stay in crisis housing? Is it a long-term situation, a short-term situation when you talk about crisis housing?
The length of stay does vary. Ultimately, we hope that it's 60 days or less. That does not always happen, though, however, unfortunately. And we've seen a drastic change in that during the pandemic. And, of course, as we have a lack of affordable housing stock, as well as greatly contributed to length of stay increasing in some ways as well.
Okay. The third goal is to expand housing stabilization and capacity.
That is looking at how we provide additional housing units within the community. What we greatly learned during the feedback of this plan and the facilitation of it was that it's not necessarily just about creating more affordable units. It's also working to strengthen partnerships with landlords that already exist in our community. So how can we better, there's many apartments that aren't being used, many units that aren't being used. How can we incentivize landlords to work with the individuals that we serve, allow them to live there? They're no different than anyone else. So how can we strengthen the pool of landlords and those partnerships that we already have in order to get individuals housed?
Yeah, so that's such an interesting idea that there are areas where there are available units, housing units, and it's not helping any landlord to have those go vacant. So you have to build those relationships, though. Is that really one of the big challenges of that part of the project?
It definitely is, especially when you're trying to establish new landlords that are willing to work and partner with our system. That's one area when we think of COVID where we were extremely creative over the last 3 years, looking at assisting landlords with repairs, looking at paying double security deposit or double rent, kind of trying to better their situation while they're also, giving a hand up to someone that's in our system and needs housing, because we believe in housing first and foremost.
And then the idea is, they're renting really to you or to, whatever one of our community partners is working with this, but eventually getting the person who's living there to a place where they can take over and be more self-sustained.
Absolutely. Okay.
The fourth goal is to connect clients to income and benefits. And I think you alluded to this before, the access and the engagement and finding the residents who need these services. You've got to have those relationships with all of the different agencies that are going to be able to help them. But the customization, that really comes down to the people in the office, right?
Yes. And you hit it spot on with your last comment about sustainability. I think housing retention and self-sufficiency is an area that our continuum of care can improve upon. It's not enough just to house someone. You can't expect them, especially if they've never lived on their own, independent living skills. How do I maintain this housing? And income is just one main piece, right? It's the priority. So our continuum has done workforce work along with our homeless services throughout easily intensively, probably last 5 to 8 years. We're elevating it now, though, recognizing it's not enough just to give housing. How do we link them up with income and benefits from the front door of entering our shelter system so that they're provided the given support after finding that housing and obtaining that housing until they're able to be self-sufficient and manage it on their own? We're going to walk beside them every step of the way. So
that's a process, right?
It absolutely is. So we look to what does that look like, though? That's finding additional employers that are willing to hire and retain our clients. It's also working, and it's getting into the next pillar of how can we, even within our continuum of care, create opportunities for people that we serve to be employed, to be able to share their experience. And one facet, lastly, when we look at income and benefits, is also looking at how do we compensate individuals with lived experience for the feedback that they're giving us into the system, for being involved in committee meetings, just valuing their expertise and what they have to give in a compensated way.
Okay. The fifth goal is to build system capacity.
So that is largely focused on both the Office of Homeless Services, which serves as the lead agency for the continuum of care, and it's also focusing on adding additional capacity to our providers. Starting with our office first, our office has been in existence for about 30 years, and we are a small but mighty staff of 4 that's responsible for the strategizing, the coordinating, the convening of our strategy to end homelessness in the community. Our office is also additionally responsible for $72 million for the procurement, contracting, and monitoring. So we do a lot of work with a small office. So since we are the lead, as they obtained feedback through this plan, our office was looked at just as well as the services. How well is the lead doing? And it was clearly identified that we're doing well and we're supporting the continuum well, but they need more. So in order to do that, it's with advocacy and county executives' blessing that hopefully we'll expand our staff to lift this plan up. This is going to be additional work. And then when we look at where we are after the pandemic, and as we emerge from the pandemic, you have providers similar to just workforce in general that are struggling with hiring, retaining staff, increased in operational costs to provide these services, oftentimes where the funding has been stagnant throughout the years. So in order to lift up this plan successfully, we will need to show investment in the continuum of care as a whole as well, so that they're able to lift up the plan with us.
As you looked at the strategic action plan and you saw the early drafts and you looked at these 5 goals, which one do you feel like is going to be the biggest challenge?
I think the housing will be. I think there are some ways that our continuum of care can improve upon that are within our control. I believe that we have the ability to create those relationships and foster those relationships with landlords if resources are also provided in order to do so. However, there's an element that I think we're all seeing in the community right now and in society of just a lack of affordable housing across the board for many individuals, and the cost of everything going up.
Well, the housing prices just last year were through the roof, and I know there's a bit of a reset now, but it's still high. It's expensive to live.
And in the survey, some of the clients, one of the questions they were asked is, what is your largest concern when you think about housing? And not surprisingly, their response was affording it. How do I maintain it once I receive it? Will I be able to find a job? Is my employment enough? Just will I have the means to make it happen and sustain it?
How can you ensure that there are fewer occasions of that housing crisis?
So we're always striving to have homelessness rare, brief, and non-reoccurring. And I think that has to be a common thread throughout our system. And it exists, but again, we're enhancing and elevating, right? So that means it starts at the front door with diversion. Talking with someone where did you stay last night? Do you have an aunt, trying to mediate maybe? Do you have somewhere else you can stay? Ultimately, we don't want anyone to enter into our system. So diversion is first and foremost what our system does. But if they have to enter our shelter system, looking at how do we wrap those services around them in a customized way, getting the housing plan set up as quickly as possible, addressing other crisis needs that they have as they're coming in, and following them with case management all the way through their initial needs being met to completing the housing application, and then hopefully giving them the key to open their own home.
Melissa Sirak is the director of Cuyahoga County's Office of Homeless Services. Next up, we'll speak with community partners who work with residents experiencing homelessness on Let's Talk Cuyahoga.
The Summer Youth Employment Program is accepting applications. Cuyahoga County residents who are in the 8th through 12th grade are invited to apply with Youth Opportunities Unlimited and get help finding a summer job. Summer jobs are shown to improve graduation rates and disrupt the cycle of economic inequality. For more information about the Summer Youth Employment Program, go to cuyahogacounty.us/podcast.
You're listening to Let's Talk Cuyahoga. We've been discussing the Strategic Action Plan for Homelessness in Cuyahoga County. And joining me now to talk about resources that are available to those who are experiencing literal homelessness is the Vice President of Housing and Shelter for Lutheran Metropolitan Ministries, Michael Searing, and LMM Shelter Coordinator, Angelo Anderson. Thank you so much both for being here.
Thank you for having us.
Glad to be here.
We are talking about homelessness. And so I guess we should start with, for somebody who's not familiar with LMM, how do you address homelessness in Cuyahoga County?
Mm-hmm. So Lutheran Metropolitan Ministry is a little over a 50-year-old nonprofit organization, and we've been operating the men's shelter at 2100 Lakeside since 2005. And I think what's really important to know for addressing homelessness is that it's a very well coordinated system, and it starts at coordinated entry with our partners Frontline Service, and our community ensures there are enough beds for everyone who needs one. So our agency provides beds for men who are homeless, as well as the family overflow shelter.
And I think one of the things that was stressed in the strategic action plan was making the shelter environment feel more welcoming, more accessible. Angelo, how long have you had an association with LMM?
Since 2005.
Since 2000.
But I've had an association with 2100 since 2000.
Okay.
We've always been welcoming. We try real hard to make sure that it's a safe environment, because some people have an adverse thought on entering into a shelter, but once we get a chance to actually talk with a person and they realize that, hey, I can give this a shot and it can help me maybe get off the street, then you see that it's a big change. It's a big difference.
Yeah, well, my question was going to be if you've seen a change over that period of time, but it sounds like
we
adapt
adapt pretty
from the
quick.
start. Yeah.
We don't have a choice. It's always changing. Our population is always changing. The needs are always changing. So we have to change with it.
And there's a big difference between crisis housing and long-term housing when you're talking about, the overarching issue in Cuyahoga County. And how does LMM address that, Michael?
Yeah, so we want to make sure collectively that there's enough shelter beds for everyone that needs one. So someone's most immediate concern, they are homeless today, we got to have a place for them today. But then at the same time, I think the strategic plan is trying to look at what are the resources, what are the options to get people into housing as soon as possible. One other thought I was thinking about discussing shelters being welcoming is really important. Our shelter and the other shelters in the community are referred to as low barrier. So not a lot of barriers or hoops to jump through to come and get shelter. You don't have to have an ID. You don't have to be sober. We just want you safe and in shelter. Another part of being welcoming, I think, is the actual configuration of shelter. And for those that have been to 2100 shelter, they know it's a congregate setting. So 365 beds, a little bit kind of, we call them dorms, maybe a little barrack kind of style. And from COVID, we were able to get some funds to start a little bit of some upgrades and renovations of like developing these little pods, like giving people a little more separation. But the better solution than that is what we're going through right now with the county having purchased the building right next to 2100 and doing a major full renovation, and it's going to have 100 beds, but we don't need 100 bed more capacity. We need better spaces for people. So once we build that out, we think that that'll be more private and more welcoming from a structural standpoint.
What's the timeline for that?
That is supposed to open this fall. And we're excited about that, and we're already planning on how are we going to, shift and staff it and all of that. And then also through county ARPA funding, there's some additional dollars available, and we'll be able to renovate 2100 itself and make that nicer as well.
In your first experiences with LMM, I'm sure you were a different person, and now you are seeing all sorts of different populations coming together. And what have you noticed? I mean, I'm sure your attitudes have changed as well. How do you help people live collaboratively in that way?
By being meeting them where they're at, by showing respect always first, and encouraging them to do the same with each other. And eventually you see a collaboration between themselves, that makes it easier for us because it's more of you than it is of me. And if you guys can figure out a way to work together, it'll make this journey a lot easier and shorter.
I'm sure there are some days where it seems a little overwhelming, but are you able to celebrate the successes? Yeah,
we celebrate our successes every day. I think it hasn't been a day, I know it ain't been a week when we ain't moved somebody into permanent housing. We haven't had a week of non-movement in a long, long time. So we celebrate that. We said, whoa, wasn't that guy his apartment? How'd that happen? And we let the other guys know, he got, this is what he did to do it. This is how we helped him. How can we help you? And our celebration comes when we due to discharge. That's the last step. Well, it's the last step for the shelter as far as his stay at the shelter. Within that new strategic plan, there's going to be a place and an expansion of wraparound services that follow an individual once they leave a shelter, and that is the key to keeping them back in their home and not coming back into the shelter. Without that follow-up, and that's what I do now, a lot of the follow-up. I'm on the phone all day long. When I'm not on the phone, I'm sitting there spaced out because of something that just happened on the phone. But I try to find ways to encourage, and it's mostly encouragement. You listen, you don't judge, then you find a way to encourage them to take the next step and go with them together to face whatever adversity they're facing at the time. We take for granted the fact that, hey, we got to block sewer. We got to go call. We got to do whatever we got to do. That would be devastating for somebody out of homelessness. It might take a half a day to calm somebody down because the toilet is stopped up. But that's what we do. That's how we keep a person in his house. That's how we keep a person growing. I think it's the fact that we encourage growth, which makes us successful, and we're going to continue to try to get better at doing that.
I love the concept of celebration. I think that most people wouldn't think of a homeless shelter as a place where you can celebrate because it is people in crisis.
That's the shock factor. When you get up on that first morning and you're in a new house and nobody else is there, there's that shock factor. There's the shock factor that, hey, you pay your rent, nobody's going to put you out. We're there for them. We take them to appointments. And all along the route, we're encouraging them to be able to do it on their own the next time.
Well, that's scary, though, because there's that tension between wanting to do it all yourself, but then having to do it all yourself, and not having those checks and balances.
Yeah. So today, whenever I take a client to an appointment, I try to take the bus route that they would have to use if they went on their own. And I say, this is where you would catch the bus from your house. And we would go where they're going. And then when we get there, I say, there go the bus stop that you would stand at when you go back home, And so, it takes a little time maybe to drive the bus route, but in doing that, it encourages them that they can do it, without getting lost.
As you look at these goals and you look at this strategic action plan and the expectations, what are some areas where you'd like to see more community partnerships?
Yeah, I think first of all, I like that it is a action plan, and that just gets you going. This is not something to sit on the shelf. This is like we really got to build this out and carry it out. The strategic action plan does include better connections with some of the other peripheral systems, not just the homeless housing system. So, for instance, there's already some action on it to better coordinate with the workforce development partners. And if they have someone that needs shelter or housing, they can connect with us. If we have, clearly we have people that need workforce development, how do we best connect with them? And finding the right mix, which one is the best suited for any certain person versus just it maybe could be willy-nilly, like which one you end up connecting with.
Can you talk about the different programs that you've seen start, because of COVID and things that you were dealing with over the last few years that are now going to be part of the program moving forward? I think we talked about direct cash.
Definitely, yeah. So terrible as COVID was, there were a few things that are ultimately going to end up being opportunities for us longer-term improvement that kind of started out of desperation during COVID.
It forced a lot of people to rethink the way things were done.
It definitely did. So one is shelters should have better spaces, and we talked a little bit about building that out and the county's commitment to do better and more private spaces for people. You mentioned direct cash transfer, which is a pretty cool model, and it's been operating in a few places nationally, but not specifically the way that we did it, where we had our staff talk with residents at the shelter. Did they have friends and family that could take them in if we were able to provide some cash assistance? And a lot of people said yes. And it was really amazing. In a little over a year, we had 400 people move in with friends and family through this program. And that included 250 people at our shelter, 50 people at our partner at the women's shelter, and 100 people with NEOC who works with unsheltered. So this idea really worked for multiple populations, and it was really cool. 92% of people that engaged with us on this met this minimum requirement to be out of the shelter for at least 2 months. And then only 5% return to the shelter even after the 2-month commitment. So the data is looking like 87% of people were housed with friends and family, rebuilt that connection, and I think it's really awesome. And it also points out that the link of poverty and homelessness, and that there are friends and family but they are such at the brink themselves that they can't another mouth to feed, so just coming with some money and some resources and making it work has been really amazing. So that is one that's called out in the strategic action plan for more review and hopefully implementation. One other thing during COVID that we did was many people know that we were temporarily using some hotels to have some good spaces for people, but not everyone could go to the hotels, so we started master leasing apartments. This is a lease between LMM and the private landlord, and we got to control the unit, and we got to put the person in that we felt needed that unit, and the landlord was glad to have us involved, have designated rent that we would be paying, and we were able to move people successfully into housing, and then they could pick up the lease from there. So it was like, wow, this is working between you guys. Now LMM doesn't need to be involved forever. It's a landlord-tenant relationship after we got it started. So those were just some things that we really had great success with, and we think those are part of these solutions moving forward.
That's awesome. And we've been talking about some success stories. I know you have Portraits of Strength program or exhibit, and can you talk a little bit about that and where you'd like to see it go?
Definitely. So we have been so proud of the amazing staff we have that have lived experience in either formerly homeless or previously incarcerated. And that's been a hallmark of Lutheran Metro Ministry for decades, going back to the 80s at Community Reentry, and purposely hiring people that had come out of prison and show what amazing things that they can do in this community. And so at 2100, that is over half of our staff, have that background, and we see that as an asset, not the old way of thinking, oh, that's some kind of deficit. No, this is the staff we want. And so in trying to highlight that, we have 15 portraits and corresponding stories, from our staff about some of their trials and tribulations, and how that's really made them even more prepared to work with our population. So it's Portraits of Strength, Stories of Redemption. So far we had our opening at City Hall, and we were at Trinity Cathedral, and we'll be looking for other high visible places to really continue to promote that. And I'm so glad to have Angelo, a staff partner, who was part of that and tells his story, and it's really, I think, motivational and inspirational for people.
And Angelo, so if somebody that you're working with says to you, well, what do you know about all this? Your response, sir, is
that I've probably been where you're at. I was homeless for 8.5 years. And when I was out there were no shelters. So the opportunities are much better for you now than they were when I was out there. The fact that I've probably been through what you're going through means that you can talk to me about it, and I won't sugarcoat it with you. What we need is the community at large to realize that homelessness isn't going away, but homelessness can be